I have done courses right from sociology to history to politics and as well as in finance.
Whatever you study here, you feel it's, there is a lot to learn in that field and there is a lot which can come out of that field.
As a student in IIT Madras, I was given the opportunity to consult with industries as well as do research work.
We also want to then start working on electric air taxis in about 1 or 2 years' time.
Here in IIT, the best thing is you can actually know whether you are passionate about this or not, because you'll have the time and also opportunity to explore each and everything.
Despite being a business student over here in IIT Madras, the uniqueness over other B schools in India is that I get to network over with the people with other departments as well.
It is no wonder that in the last 5 years, the major technology startups that have made headlines in India are from IIT Madras.
It's a great place for students to enhance their learning.
Department of Management Studies, we started in the year 2004, and we are a good 15-year-old department, and we are growing as of now.
One of the things we've been involved in is an executive MBA program, which is meant for people with a lot of experience, a huge amount of peer learning that's involved, because the batch size is quite diverse.
DOMS IIT Madras has the culture of working closely with the industry, which enables nurturing leaders and entrepreneurs through a holistic and grounded learning experience.
We are extremely privileged to be collaborating with the other departments of this technical institution. We typically do courses in departments such as computer science, electrical engineering, humanities and social science.
Technology bridged with business management, Tech MBA. This is first time in the history of IITs that we have started something like a Tech MBA program.
We also have government-funded projects which help the scholars in contributing towards building a better nation.
We're proud to say that many of our MBA students in the earlier batches have reached the CXO level as of now.
The Institute of Eminence scheme has been launched by the Government of India to empower higher educational institutions and help them become world-class teaching and research institutions. IIT Madras is proud to have been selected as one of the select institutes of excellence. As part of our commitment to the cause of fostering world-class research, IIT Madras has set up a number of research initiatives in diverse fields of contemporary relevance. Many of these initiatives will go on to become centers of excellence within the IIT.
Hello and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is Ujwala from the Office of Global Engagement at IIT Madras. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 54th webinar from the IRIS webinar series. The Institute of Eminence scheme was launched by the Government of India to empower higher educational institutions and help them become world-class teaching and research institutes. IIT Madras is proud to have been selected as one such Institute of Eminence. A total of 68 research initiatives belonging to 21 identified technology clusters are presently underway at IIT Madras. As a part of these initiatives, the IRIS webinar series aims to showcase the innovative research being generated to various stakeholders like students, researchers, industrialists, and policymakers. From the Earth Sciences Technology Cluster, the research initiative presenting today is called the Geophysical Flows Lab, led by Dr. Manikandan Mathur. The research initiative will employ a synergistic combination of field measurements in the coastal ocean, large-scale ocean and climate models, and fundamental studies of small-scale processes in the laboratory towards applications such as monsoon prediction and environmental modeling. Working with various labs across India, the research initiative aims to complement classical oceanography and meteorology with measurements using custom-made unmanned aerial systems. The Indian ocean dynamics, specifically in the data-sparse coastal regions, will represent a common theme running across the activities of the research initiative. To introduce Dr. Mathur, who is the principal investigator of this research initiative, Dr. Mathur is an associate professor in the Department of Aerospace Engineering at IIT Madras. Dr. Mathur has been at IIT Madras since October 2012. prior to which he was a postdoc in joint appointment between École Polytechnique and ENS de Lyon in France and the LEGI. He did his doctoral studies in the mechanical engineering at MIT, USA, after a master's in engineering mechanics at the Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Science Research, JNCSR, Bengaluru. He is an alumnus of IIT Madras, having done his BTech in aerospace engineering during 2000 to 2004. Geophysical fluid dynamics is one of his main research areas, and he uses a wide range of theoretical, experimental, and numerical tools. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Mathur. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the webinar today, Professor Eric Desaro. Professor Eric Desaro is a senior principal oceanographer and a professor of oceanography in the Applied Physics Laboratory, University of Washington, Seattle, USA. Professor Desaro is an internationally acclaimed scientist in oceanography with over 4 decades of experience in the field. He is a recipient of the prestigious Swerdrup Gold Medal awarded by the American Meteorological Society and is a fellow of the US National Academy of Sciences, American Geophysical Union, and American Meteorological Society. His research spans a wide number of environments, from upper ocean mixed layers to nearshore coastal fronts to fjords to deep convection. Thank you for joining us today, sir. We're very excited that you could be a part of this session. We also have a very distinguished panel with faculty from across various departments of IIT Madras. We have Dr. Samin, Dr. Anubhav Roy, Dr. Balaji Srinivasan, Dr. Bharat Govindarajan, Dr. Hechison Murthy, Dr. Jayachandran, Dr. Joel George, Dr. Thao, Dr. Ramakrishna, and also Dr. P.A. Ramakrishna, Dr. M. Ramakrishna and Dr. P.A. Ramakrishna as our distinguished panel members, who are also the co-PIs leading this initiative along with Dr. Mathur. Before we start, a note to the participants: please use the Q&A section to enter your questions and upload the questions that interest you, so the moderator can prioritize them later. Over to you, Dr. Mathur.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Could you please confirm that you're able to see my screen?
Yes, Professor.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. So I welcome everyone to this introductory webinar on Geophysical Flows Lab. Good evening to one and all participating from India. And good morning to our collaborators and participants from the US. Before I proceed, I would like to thank IIT Madras and our director, Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, for their support for this research initiative on Geophysical Flows Lab. Shown here is a satellite image of the sea surface temperature in the northern Indian Ocean, showing a wide range of spatial scales that are present. And as we go along, this would become a common theme running across the presentation. So I'll quickly summarize this research initiative and the participants before formally introducing everyone in the next couple of slides. And the last 10 minutes or so will be focused on the scientific aspects. So the longer term goal of this initiative is to establish a National Center of Excellence with a unified approach towards geophysical flows. We are a team of 11 faculty members at IIT Madras, along with Debashish Sengupta at the Indian Institute of Science, who has been involved with this initiative right from the beginning. And we have an integral part of this initiative are the national labs in India. I will specify them one by one in the coming slides. And as I said, the overriding theme is to have a unified approach between field measurements in the ocean and the atmosphere, large-scale climate modeling, and fundamental studies of fine-scale processes in the laboratory. We target applications such as improved monsoon prediction and modeling and better understanding of the ocean environment, including aspects related to ocean biology and pollutant transport. There is a significant technology aspect to this initiative, where we are designing, developing, and deploying unmanned aerial systems for various applications in oceanography and meteorology. We will significantly benefit from a wide range of international collaborations across 10 different universities, including those from France and the US. So I would go over the participants, all the list of all the co-investigators in this research initiative. Anubhav Roy is in applied mechanics. Balaji Srinivasan is in mechanical engineering. The rest of the faculty are from aerospace engineering, namely Bharat Govindarajan, Jayachandran, Joel George, Louis Tau, myself, HSN Murthy, M. Ramakrishna, P.A. Ramakrishna, and A. Samin. We span a wide range of expertise, starting from fundamental process modeling of geophysical flows to field measurements to technology development that involves the unmanned aerial systems. We also, an integral part of this initiative is participation from Debashish Sengupta as a scientific advisor from the Indian Institute of Science. And the national labs, which are an integral part, include the National Institute of Ocean Technology and the National Center for Coastal Research in Chennai, the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services in Hyderabad, the National Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting at Noida, and Space Applications Center from Ahmedabad. The international collaborators include Amit Tandon at the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, Emily Schroer, Jonathan Nash, and Simon D. Joke at Oregon State University, Craig Lee and Eric Dazzaro at University of Washington. Eric Dazzaro has kindly agreed to moderate this discussion today. Drew Lucas, Jennifer McKinnon, and Sutanu Sarkar at the University of California at San Diego. Amala Mahadevan and Tom Farrar at the Ujjwal Oceanographic Institution. Andrea Maffioli, Helen Scolan, and Louis Gostio at École Centrale in Lyon. Ani Subramanian at the University of Colorado, USA, Thierry Doxo at ENS Lyon, Mohammad Husam Kasboi at Arizona State University, and finally Sasan Saidi from the Harvard University. I would like to thank all the participants, both Indian and foreign, for their involvement in this exciting research initiative. As I said, an important outcome we would like to achieve is to have a unified approach towards modeling and understanding these large-scale geophysical flows. Conventionally, you have ocean-going field experiments or large-scale climate models or fundamental laboratory studies of these small-scale processes that occur more or less in isolation. And with the current expertise we have at IIT Madras and all over India, and the significant strength that's already present in field measurements and large-scale climate modeling, the time couldn't be better to combine all these approaches so that they are complementary to one another. Specifically, we would like to perform a targeted survey of the coastal regions of the Northern Indian Ocean. And as we will see in a few minutes, these are regions whose dynamics are quite important and historically not been well measured or well understood. Along with my colleagues in aerospace engineering, we are designing and developing autonomous unmanned aerial systems that could be quite revolutionary for making measurements both in the atmosphere and the ocean. There are several people with expertise in doing fundamental studies of small-scale processes in the lab, and we plan to make a conscious effort to motivate these fundamental studies from the real ocean and hopefully feed back into large-scale climate modeling and field measurements. Finally, large-scale modeling is a significant part of the initiative too, working with National Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting and a few large-scale modelers that are a part of the group. As far as the focus is concerned, we would like to focus on the Northern Indian Ocean, with the first few years being spent in the Bay of Bengal, while the ideas that we think about and work on being relevant to the entire global oceans. Okay, geophysical flows essentially refer to flows that occur in the atmosphere and the ocean of Earth. This is an inherently multi-scale system having forcing and dynamics occurring over a wide range of temporal scales, starting from maybe a few seconds to minutes to decade-long time scales, and over a wide range of spatial scales too, maybe from a few meters, at which scales small-scale turbulence and mixing occurs, to planetary scales, which essentially are dominated by phenomena such as sun's heating. And the ocean, this is a cartoon that depicts the complex system that the ocean is. You have typically forcing from sun's radiation, freshwater input from precipitation or glacial melting, and river inflow into the oceans. And you also have forcing provided on the ocean surface from the momentum in the wind. And going inside the ocean, there are several interesting dynamics over a range of scales that are occurring, including boundary layer type phenomena at the ocean floor, interaction between the tides and the ocean floor topography at the bottom, and boundary layer type phenomena that are occurring near the ocean surface. And these dynamics occurring in the upper ocean are a critical part of how the ocean and the atmosphere interact with one another and hence influence the monsoon dynamics. The Bay of Bengal is quite special in terms of the amount of freshwater input that it receives from the rivers and the monsoon, and in terms of the number of people it actually affects in the Indian subcontinent. So shown on the right top is a satellite image of the sea surface temperature, revealing very fine scales of the order of a few kilometers that emerge in the sea surface temperature. So the occurrence of these scales are beginning to be recognized, but what is their role of all these scales in the actual air-sea interactions and ultimately the monsoon dynamics is not so well understood. And that is going to be one of the focal points in this research initiative. Shown at the right bottom is a laboratory simulation of a large-scale geophysical phenomenon. So we would be performing fundamental studies in the stratified and rotating flows laboratory at IIT Madras to drive and govern the direction of some of the problems that we take up in the overall center. So with respect to observations, India has historically been very strong and benefited heavily from fixed mooring buoy observations. Shown here is a network that is maintained by the National Institute of Ocean Technology, along with INCOIS in Hyderabad and other international organizations. And one of the gaps that we find in these observations is the coastal regions are not so well covered. I would like to point out that satellite observations also tend to be relatively inaccurate in the coastal regions. And for both practical and scientific reasons, field measurements or in situ observations in the coastal regions have also been not so frequent. And on the right is a climate modeling study from the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, which essentially showed that modeling large-scale sea surface temperature fronts is very critical in ensuring that the climate models are able to predict subseasonal events of the Indian summer monsoon. So the sea surface temperature in turn affects what the upper ocean mixed layer thickness is, and hence the dynamics associated with air-sea interactions. Thinking about actual physical processes, this is a nice figure that I borrowed from Craig Lee and Eric Dazzaro at the University of Washington. In the schematic, you have spatial scales on the x-axis and the time scales on the y-axis. The monsoon tends to be typically containing features of relatively large spatial and temporal scales, whereas it's well recognized that it's significantly influenced by the range of scales that is present in the sea surface temperature. And sea surface temperature itself is influenced by a whole wide range of temporal and spatial scales, as depicted in this cartoon by various processes that are indicated here. And based on several discussions amongst this entire panel, we have recognized that focusing the field observations on coastal processes, which are not so well understood, submesoscale processes and internal waves could be the way forward. and whereas the modeling and the fundamental studies in the laboratory would span the entire range of spectrum that is indicated here. The technology aspect is the design, development, and deployment of unmanned aerial systems. These are being developed at IIT Madras. There are essentially two kinds of vehicles that are being developed for our applications. One is a conventional quad rotor that can do vertical profiles in the atmosphere, potentially a partial replacement for weather balloon-like measurements, and also having imaging systems that can look at the sea surface. Shown on the right, to achieve extended range in the lateral directions, is a conventional fixed wing type unmanned aerial systems. This is, yeah. Was there a question? Okay. And hopefully during the discussion session, we will have my colleagues discuss a little more about our efforts on unmanned aerial systems at IIT Madras. The fine-scale fundamental studies would involve, on the left, dynamics associated with internal waves. Internal waves are ways by which energy and momentum can get transported to very large-scale distances in the ocean. Typical forcing mechanisms include winds acting on the ocean surface, which excite internal waves at the Coriolis frequency, the local inertial frequencies, or the interaction between barotropic tides and the ocean floor topography, which end up generating internal tides. Both of these are now recognized to contain huge amounts of energy, and this continuous input of energy into internal waves ultimately dissipate. Questions about where exactly they dissipate are critical in understanding the overall ocean dynamics. There are also efforts concerning instabilities that occur in eddies that are often found in the northern Indian Ocean. And the main idea here is that some of these instabilities associated with the eddies are poorly or completely unresolved in large-scale climate models. So can these fundamental studies lead to improved parameterizations of these fine-scale processes? And finally, sea spray, which is essentially a multi-phase flow phenomena occurring on the air-sea interface and is a significant factor in momentum exchanges between the ocean and the atmosphere. Geophysical turbulence is another theme that we would like to work on, which would combine theoretical and numerical studies to study various forms of geophysical turbulence. Shown here on the left top is an example of how advective transport can partially describe the orientation and the occurrence of large-scale sea surface temperature fronts in the Bay of Bengal. And post-processing tools that include proper orthogonal decomposition and Lagrangian covariance structures will be developed to understand these geophysical flows. Of course, as I mentioned, improved parameterization of several small-scale three-dimensional phenomena is also one of the goals, along with ever improving ideas from machine learning to improve some of the turbulence models. Finally, transport of small scale of both fluid-like and inertial particles is an important consideration in this research initiative. Shown here is a cartoon depicting a whole range of processes that affect transport of particles like, let's say, microplastics or nutrients or pollutants like oil spill, and modeling and understanding how these get transported in a geophysical flow is also one of the focal points. There are two separate laboratory facilities at IIT Madras, which would look at the effects of stratification, shown here on the left in the Waves and Instabilities Laboratory. We have a stratified flows facility in which problems related to internal waves and wakes of bodies in stratified environment are being studied. And on the right is a facility to study the effects of Earth's background rotation in geophysical flows. In the example that's shown here, we are modeling large-scale geoatmospheric or oceanic jet and its bistability characteristics as a result of interaction with ocean floor topography. As I've mentioned all along, there are several applications of societal relevance concerning this center. improving prediction of monsoon and other subseasonal events associated with it is an important final goal that we have. And ocean biology, which includes aspects like improved identification of potential fishing zones, modeling and understanding pollutant transport better, is also an important application. Finally, the possibilities that would be opened up by the recent technology of unmanned aerial systems is quite huge. In the beginning stages of this initiative, we will demonstrate its use for fundamental measurements in the atmosphere and the ocean. As I said, in the longer term of over a decade, I think this can make a significant improvement to existing techniques in oceanography. And the overall research goals are quite relevant to the society, and the specific organizations in India and the US that it's relevant for are listed here. This is a very quick summary of the various opportunities or ways in which one could take part in the activities of the center. I think this was beautifully summarized in the video that we had just before my presentation. Please look at the website on IIT Madras's webpage for various information regarding this initiative, including newsletters that cover recent developments, both scientific and technology-wise. And there are also several events, including webinars, regular webinars, and other meetings that we would be organizing. So this is where you would find all such information. For more specific information, and if you're really interested to learn more about the center, please feel free to either contact Abhita, who's of great administrative help in this running of the center, and my email address is given here. In the event where I am unable to answer your questions, I will surely put you in touch with the right people. There are several opportunities, both for Indians and non-Indian students and researchers to take part in the center activities. I would strongly encourage everyone to look at the formal summer fellowship programs, the graduate programs, which include the course-based MTech and research-based MS and PhD programs, and the postdoctoral fellowship programs. There are equivalents of each of these programs that are possible for non-Indians as well. Please do look at our Global Engagement Office's website. So this is where I will stop, and I'm happy to take this forward in the form of discussions. Thank you.
So I believe at this point we get to address questions to the panel, correct?
That's right, Eric.
Okay, so there are a number of questions. I have to, please forgive me if you wrote a question. The questions just flash up on my screen and then they disappear. So I've been trying to write them down and I won't get them exactly right. So let's start at a fairly broad level. One of the questions was, what are climate models, and how does this program goals and activities relate to those?
Yeah. So climate models are essentially numerical models that solve the governing equations for fluid flows. But here things are complex due to various reasons. One of the main ones is if you want to represent a large scale region like, let's say, the Indian Ocean, you would need a large scale grid, but at the same time, the resolution in this grid has to be fine enough to capture or resolve processes that are occurring at very small scales. For example, the small scale turbulence and mixing is occurring at spatial scales of around 1 meter. And you're talking about the entire domain being thousands of kilometers. So it's impossible that these numerical models that are still solving the correct governing equations can resolve or capture the processes that are occurring at small scales, which would mean inaccurately representing these small scale processes lead to errors in the predictions from the models. At this point, I would also like to highlight these climate models involve simultaneously solving the dynamics in both the ocean and the atmosphere. And that's an extremely non-trivial problem because both have their respective spatial and time scales that are occurring within them. And even modeling how exactly the atmosphere and the ocean talk to each other is non-trivial.
Somebody else from the panel want to take a stab at that one? So there was a question that just came up, which is very much related to that. And the comment was, wouldn't direct numerical simulations, in which case I think they mean solving the equations directly at viscous scales, take a lot of time, and can other computational fluid dynamic methods be used? And indeed, this is the right question. That a great deal of the challenge in these problems are that you can't solve the equations at the highest resolution because you can't get from centimeter scales to the size of the Earth. And so that means we have to use approximations, and perhaps Amit or someone could describe the physics and the parameterizations essentially that are associated with that problem.
Thank you, Eric. So I would just add to what Eric said. There are, if you think about the Earth's diameter scales, which are 10,000 kilometers, and if you want to resolve down to centimeter scales, you're talking about running these on computers that haven't been built yet, and we'd be waiting for another 100 years to do so. Also to understand the results of such models if they were ever possible. So what we end up doing is parameterizing those processes that we can't resolve. So we do use numerical simulations like direct numerical simulations to understand how to parameterize these processes that we cannot include in larger models. So these are called process models. So a number of us use process models to understand the physics and get the most essential items that we can then include in the climate model. So one phenomena that happens in the Bay of Bengal, for example, there are lots of mesoscale eddies and even smaller fronts and eddies, and including these eddies in larger scale numerical models and climate models, for example, is an area of active research.
This is Emily. I'll also add that climate models, they not only include the atmosphere and ocean, they often also include ice and snow, as well as things like land surface changes. And so they're trying to understand the Earth system from an integrated perspective.
One of the initiatives in this program is a bunch of small scale, essentially fine scale studies using either laboratory methods or numerical methods. And perhaps someone here on the panel, perhaps Dr. Anubhav could address the importance of those in developing these parameterizations that we were just talking about.
So a key thing here is we are trying these different direct numerical simulations and doing detailed calculations. And one idea would be to use them for parameterization, especially these large scale simulations. One thing that enters into is the fine scale parameterization. So as part of this initiative, some of us are looking at the detailed small scale processes and use that to improve the parameterization that are already going into the large scale simulations.
And could you or perhaps someone else talk about the differing roles of using numerical simulations or laboratory tanks to do this, to address this?
So maybe if I could pitch in here, the purpose of laboratory experiments is essentially to understand the physics of some of these fine scale processes. So it's the goal from the experiments would be to understand, for example, the physics of the processes and the scalings of various parameters. For example, how does the heat transport scale with a parameter like stratification? And those kinds of scaling laws that we can derive from experiments would drive what we actually do in designing process models or as input into these large scale models. Maybe there are other fine scale modelers who would like to add something.
Okay, so two of the, unless somebody else says something, there were two, actually more than two, but two that I recall, important initiatives here. One's had to do with the monsoons, and the other had to do with the Indian coastal zone. The monsoons are a big challenge and a big interesting problem. I'm wondering if the basis could tell us a little bit about some of the challenges associated with monsoons that are associated with the oceanography and this type of project.
Yes, I don't know the specific question. Was that just generally about the monsoon?
Yes, just could you give some background about how, more specifically, how the type of science that is being addressed here impacts the monsoon? Give us some background on that.
All right, so that's a good question. So one of the big uncertainties of how the monsoon is represented in numerical models, or climate models, or prediction models, is why clouds cluster together. Clouds like to stay in clusters. They grow very rapidly. Each individual cloud might grow in 10 minutes to half an hour, but then they cluster together and form long-lived cloud clusters, which are sometimes called storms. And that's one of the interesting things about the monsoon. A lot of our rain comes from these storms. That doesn't simulate very well in the present day models. So that's one of the questions. The second question, of course, is many of these storms are born over the ocean, and they all pass the coastal ocean. As they approach the coast, there should be big changes in the characteristics of these storms. Now, that's the other thing to understand. How does the storm get energy from the ocean? How does it get modified as it passes the coastal ocean? And how does it get modified as it crosses over into land? These things are research questions in the sense that their representation in the models is not great. So that's one of the objectives that I think is a focus of this program too.
So a much more specific question is associated with river water. We now have this nice picture here where this is, of course, sea surface temperature, and you can see something very special happens in the northern end of the Bay of Bengal, which is associated with the river water coming in here. And the question was, so the fresh water from the rivers has an important effect on the monsoon. And perhaps, again, this may be the basis question again, that we believe that affects the monsoon. And the question specifically was, as the river flow changes and the river salinity changes, do we expect that to be an important thing that might happen in terms of future monsoons and an interaction of that type?
Yes, I see an answer, a very nice answer already from Emily in the question and answers. So Emily says the salinity of river water is almost zero. The salt content is zero. It's fresh water. It's very low compared to the ambient ocean water, which is near 35 parts per thousand, or 35 grams per kilogram. Salinity changes will be small compared to changes in the amount of fresh water fed into the river or discharge, but changes in the discharge rate, for example, due to changes in the rainfall over land, will be important to understand. And one of the simplest reasons, I think, also Mani mentioned this in his presentation, is that the river water forms a thin and light layer floating on the top of the ocean until it gets mixed up with the seawater. But while it maintains that strong stratification, it affects the sea surface temperature, and the atmosphere feels the sea surface temperature and the gradient spatial changes in sea surface temperature. So it is expected to affect the monsoon. Once again, we don't understand some of the physics that is associated with how the river water gets mixed with the seawater and how it affects the sea surface temperature. So that's another focus point of this program.
So there were a number of questions that were somewhat more practical. I thought we could move on to that. The question is, why can we use helium balloons? And the answer is that is an extremely standard technique in meteorology. It's been going on for getting on close to 100 years. But one of the innovations in this particular program is to try to get beyond that using unmanned aerial systems. And I'm wondering if Dr. Murthy could talk about the program that's going on in that and how that will complement some of these, both balloons and other techniques that are currently in use.
Yeah. As already said, we are already using balloons for launching radio sounds, and then that essentially the balloons are not that controllable. And consequently not that well controlled, and then you're basically launching the balloons and then you're trying to get profile with altitude, and control is a problem, one thing. And then of course there are other ways of measuring as well. Like in situ measurements that we do are through your ships and through voice. Again, they are all like, at a particular point you're measuring all this parameters. But then if you want to cover a wider area, or let's say you want to cover at a single point, you want to cover, you want to, in a controlled manner, unlike hot air balloon, in a controlled manner, if you want to take profile across the altitude, there aren't very many options available now, is our understanding. So what we are looking at is developing a whole lot of unmanned aerial systems to do this. As in, can we use a quadrotor instead of a hot air balloon to have vertical measurements at a given point, and then can we have some sort of fixed wing systems or hybrid systems which will take off like a quadrotor and then fly like a fixed wing to cover a much larger area. Because what happens right now is the buoys and ships, they're all measuring at a single location, and then we have the other extreme wherein through satellites we are covering a very large area, but then the resolution is smaller. So now we are looking at going much lower height and get much higher resolution, so that some of this phenomena that are occurring at a lower length scale can also be covered. So we are looking at can we fly a UAV at around, let's say, 3 to 4 kilometer altitude, and then we cover eventually 3 to 4 kilometer altitude. And to begin with, we may cover only about 1 kilometer altitude, and then can we cover a much wider area? Because if it's a fixed wing aircraft, I can cover a much wider area at a much lower altitude as compared to satellite. So I can cover a much wider area as compared to using ships and buoys. So that's the basic idea. As part of that, we have already been engaged in development of 3 different systems: quadrotors, fixed wings, and hybrid systems, which will take off like quadrotor and fly like a fixed wing. In addition, one thing is, in one flight, we would like to cover as wide an area as possible. That is also possible if we go towards some of the IC engines based system. So those are the things that we are trying to do to support already very good measurements and works that are going on, modeling works that are going on in geophysical flows. Did I miss anything? Bharat, you want to add anything? Bharat?
Sure, thank you very much. I think pretty much covered most of it. I suppose just want to point out that we feel that while all the systems and all the measurement techniques are important, and we feel like the UAS can actually complement the existing set of techniques and sort of provide controlled profiles and potentially high spatial and temporal resolution. And with this center, with just the perfect confluence of geophysical flows, climate modeling, and unmanned aircraft, we feel like there's a fair amount of value to be added. The one other thing, I suppose, with the UAS systems that we are developing is because we sort of control the development and integration of these components. It sort of gives us the freedom to customize the instrumentation based on the experience and the needs. So we have the freedom to sort of change based on what we get and interact with the climate modeling folks, and then we can go back and sort of change it and sort of add the highest amount of value. Yeah, that was. Thank you.
So fundamentally, it fills in the gap. I mean, you're at from satellite, you're covering a huge area, but low resolution, and then you're taking local measurements. This fills in a gap somewhere in between.
Could you, when you're doing this sort of measurement, just like with satellites, there are multiple challenges. Some of them can be grouped into making the satellite fly or the airplane fly where you want it to. And the other challenge is that you have to have sensors on it, which have rather sometimes very severe limitations because they're not big aircraft. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the sensors that you either plan to use initially or might want to use in the future when you that you might be interested in developing or could have partners develop.
So the sensors part of it right now, what we are looking at is using standard sensors which are available. Development of new sensors will come at a later stage. What we are looking at is using standard sensors, and then but we have to think of positioning these sensors appropriately, because positioning the sensors, where we are going to fix, etc., are not trivial. So that is something that we need to do over a few trips on cruise, and then launch it on ship, and then we have to figure that out. Because it's not, otherwise sensors will get affected by the flow or my UAV itself. So that's something we have to figure it out after a few cruises. But then we are, as of now, immediately we are not looking at developing our own sensors. We are looking at taking off-the-shelf sensors and integrating with our systems, unmanned aerial systems. Bharat, your audio is not clear.
Yeah, Bharat, your voice is breaking.
I could add two other points to some of these questions. I think.
So, Eric, are you able to hear Bharat?
No, we are not able to hear him.
Okay. So maybe I could add that in the first few trials, we are planning to use a radio sound, which is typically used on a weather balloon to make profiles of temperature and humidity in the atmosphere. And we would have pitot-like probes to measure wind speeds in the atmosphere. And we would have some imaging systems in the visible range and infrared to potentially look at events on the sea surface and temperature too. In the longer run, we would be looking at these multispectral and hyperspectral imaging payloads to extract sea surface maps of various species like salinity or other chemical species.
Oh, yeah, correct. Sorry, I gave a more generic answer. I think specifics is important too. I didn't realize we needed to give some specifics here. Yeah, we are planning to use radio sounds and infrared imaging systems and visual cameras.
So Manny, at the end of your talk, you listed a bunch of opportunities that both for a wide variety of partners and participants. I'm wondering, yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relationship of these opportunities to some of these research programs that you've been talking about.
Yeah, so maybe Professor Murthy is a little more appropriate. He is the head of the Department of Aerospace Engineering. Maybe Professor Murthy is a little more appropriate to talk about these programs, and then I will pitch in if I want to add something. Is that okay, Murthy?
Yeah, sure. You are talking about the summer fellowship program and MTech, MS and PhD and Institute postdoctoral fellowship. Is that what you're talking about, Mike?
Yeah, these are the programs for Indians and equivalent programs for non-Indians.
No, I mean, see, right now, for all these centers, we have instituted quite a few postdoctoral fellowships, which, I mean, I'm not sure what is the information that we want from this.
No, the idea is if there are students who are not part of the IIT system right now. So yeah, I would just like to highlight that there are these summer internship programs targeted at undergraduates, not necessarily at IIT. So this is a fellowship program with residents at IIT during the summer of every year. And the MTech, MS and PhD are graduate programs that we offer. There are several postdoctoral fellowships. I would like to highlight that these have become quite attractive, both from a research and a financial viewpoint at IITs. So if there are potential personnel who would like to be involved in this center's activities, you're most welcome to write to us. There's a lot more information. If you're not able to find information easily on IIT Madras's website, please do write to us. And with respect to non-Indian participants, there are exchange programs with our international collaborators that are facilitated under this initiative. There's also a new exciting program for postdocs from abroad. They will be treated like young faculty. And this is for a minimum period of 2 years with some teaching responsibilities, but predominantly independent research-based program with faculty mentor identified at IIT Madras. So any of us would be very happy to discuss these possibilities with you if you're interested.
So assuming we still have time, Manny, there's 2 more questions. We can finish up with those. One has got to do with how biology, we're talking mostly about ocean, can affect these systems through changing the color of the ocean. Maybe since you gave the answer, Emily, why don't you take this one?
Sure. So I think there's several ways that life on this planet can affect the flow in either the atmosphere or the ocean. So I kind of answered both for the atmosphere side. So when we think about plant growth and changes in land, on land, that will affect our atmosphere through changes in albedo and also the exchange of moisture and also our carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So that's one direct impact. And then the ocean, the plants that grow in the upper ocean, the plankton, they affect the color of the ocean. And you often see these beautiful images from space that show the changes in optical properties at the surface of the ocean. But that affects how sunlight penetrates into the ocean, and that affects where heat is stored. And in that way, it can change the stratification of the upper ocean. And once you change the stratification of the upper ocean, you can start to change the flow of the ocean. And so they are connected.
There's a wonderful calculation that has been done, which you say if there were no plants in the upper part of the ocean so that the ocean sunlight penetrated much further, then the ocean surface temperatures would be much less, and there in fact would be no tropical cyclones. Of course, we wouldn't have any oxygen to breathe either, so many other things would be wrong also, but just as a measure of the impact of that. And one of the emphases in this project is, at least initially, in the Bay of Bengal. I'll let Amit finish up on this one. Question is, what's peculiar about the Bay of Bengal compared to other oceans?
So I think Debashish referred to this earlier in his answer, Eric, where he mentioned that there are many major rivers that flow into the Bay of Bengal. And if you look at the global salinity picture, this is directed at the students here, you will see that the Bay of Bengal lights up as one of the least saline oceans, certainly at this scale. And this sets up a very unique layering in the Bay of Bengal. So these river waters plus the precipitation that comes from the monsoon clouds hangs around in the bay for quite a bit long, weeks to months, that we've seen with our students. And that influences the atmosphere above in non-trivial ways. So Bay of Bengal that way is quite unique in terms of the very strong salinity fronts. So you can think of, 35 PSU water next to 20 or 22 PSU water in the ocean, which generates very, very strong fronts, which then get stretched by mesoscale eddies that you can see from space. So there's very interesting dynamics that goes on, and it has a feedback on the atmosphere. Emily also partly answered this question in terms of how Bay of Bengal is unique. I have posted a link to a set of articles which are aimed at general audience. So there's an Oceanography Society which publishes a free journal. It's freely available on the internet. And I have posted the link there for the students to check it out. There are many articles there, many of them arising from the joint program between an earlier joint program between India and the US, and which gave us a lot of insight into how the processes at these smaller scales behave in the Bay of Bengal. So I would encourage you to have a look at that. And we will continue a lot of this process of discovery and how to include this and incorporate these in bigger scale models by working with GFL in the future.
I wonder, Manny, if you have any closing words here?
Yeah, before my closing words, Bharat just messaged me saying he had an internet connection issue. He also pointed out that the processing of the data that we collect from the unmanned aerial systems is also an exciting area of research, including image processing algorithms that we would have to use to process the images that we obtain from the unmanned systems. So that's something that there is a lot of expertise at IIT Madras. That's something that I just wanted to point out. Yeah, so apart from that, yeah, we are all quite excited to be part of, to get going with this research initiative, and with strong support from the strong national labs across India and our international collaborators. We are quite hopeful that a more unified approach would emerge, where we have active input from field measurements, the climate modeling community, and fundamental process studies people, and we are all complementing each other. So that's a real goal that we are trying to achieve, and take advantage of the already strong infrastructure that is present in India. Eric, am I audible?
Dr. Mathur?
Yes. Yeah.
We can hear you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mathur, for your excellent presentation. We also thank Professor Saro, our moderator, for this webinar. We also thank our panelists, distinguished panelists from various departments at IITM. We have more webinars coming up on the 1st of October. I request all the participants to stay tuned for more interesting webinars under the IRIS webinar series. Thank you one and all for your participation, and on behalf of Office of Global Engagement, I would like to thank one and all for being present in today's webinar. Good night.